This is a video about Patrick Lecture 250, Faith, Grace, and Deficit. And this is week 3, which focuses on risking to have faith. And the premise is, and the guide always builds some really interesting arguments for the concept. He outlines many different facets so that by the time he says it comes to the main part of it, it makes more sense. So I'm outlining this in the same way. In terms of risking to have faith, the first thing is to look at where you are. If you're perfectly happy and everything's going well, you've got no incentive to change anything, and you may actually be doing everything right. Uh, the trick is, are your spiritual finances in order? And that will be reflected in your economic finances, your work finances, and your relationship finances. However, you may not see it. That may be true. So whether or not it exists is one question. Reality is one thing. What you perceive is quite another. And denial is a reality. You can be in denial your entire life. That doesn't change reality, but it certainly doesn't provide you with any incentive to do anything about it. And it also tends to promote coming up with different reasons for why that exists or why a problem exists. So spiritual finances or spiritual deficit of any kind in any area is built on deficit, lack of faith. Take that one part and apply it to relationships. If you don't have faith in the relationship, it's as if you go in with a 10% commitment. How can you commit if you don't have faith? Because you don't know exactly what every day will bring. You're going to have to believe to some extent without evidence, and that's faith. You're going to have to believe that it's going to work. You have to believe in the good faith and goodwill of the other person, and then you verify that. You notice any discrepancies. So lack of faith is going to make you withhold. It's going to make you pull back on your energy, on your commitment, on your willingness to give. And when you do give, you won't be giving 100%. Can't give 100% if you're holding anything back. Now, the pothole to this, or the pitfall to this, is that you can't give 100%. And to think in those terms will create a deficit because you're actually in dualistic thinking. Duality is covered in Patrick Lecture 143, Unity and Duality. Dualistic thinking pervades all the lectures, just a matter of seeing it. So that in a right, wrong, good, bad, yes, no, all or nothing scenario, except in the land of spirit, on the human plane, on the earth plane, you're not going to get all the time. And therefore, if your immediate response is, if I can't get it all, I don't want anything, or I won't invest anything, you're going to be in deficit. So when you invest, it's going to have to be the best you can do. That is, by definition, the best you can do. Even if you're wrong, even if you're still withholding, if you don't know you're withholding, you can't fix it. So you'll need to wait for awareness to come. Where does the awareness come from? Feedback. Feedback from slammed doors, reality, economics, whatever the feedback is. Either it leads you to shift your perception and your attitude, or it leads you to harden it, or it leaves you doing nothing at all. The point is that the unconscious speaks. This is another lecture, Patrick Lecture 124, The Language of the Unconscious. And the phrase that sticks with me from that lecture is learning the language of the unconscious, how your unconscious beliefs express themselves, is as well as your positive impulses, but learning how these are expressed, what they mean, etc., is no different than learning a human language. It takes work. And that loops us back around to, are you willing to invest the work? Are you willing to invest the effort? Are you willing to take the time? Are you willing to allow reality to change at a pace that doesn't fit your demands, your expectations? Are you willing to work with what is, or are you attempting to superimpose a reality that doesn't exist? Basically, are you trying to live in fantasy? It should happen this way. Maybe a fair statement about a perfect world, but not necessarily about the world we live in. So spiritual finances, when built on deficit, will inevitably lead to some kind of breakdown, some kind of crisis, a form of bankruptcy. Now, people always point out the crooks that get away with it. And that's shorthand for anybody who doesn't live a life according to spiritual law, who is mean or stingy or whatever they're doing. If that's true, and that's true for them, they will reap the rewards of that. That's the concept of karma. There's an accounting system, but they may not be forced to see it in this lifetime. This is really hard for the human ego to grasp. It's very frustrating. We want to see people get there. The Southern American word for it is comeuppance. We want to see justice done immediately. And that's a demand that the spiritual world work to our demands and expectations instead of what might be actually more effective for the other person. And that is to seemingly get away with it and only realize personally, quietly, privately that they didn't. Not every confession needs to be in the newspaper. So bankruptcy, crisis, breakdown, these are what happens when something doesn't work for so long that it reaches a crisis point. Sorry to quote all these lectures, but that's a crisis lecture, Patrick Lecture 183. And that crisis exposes the deficit. So what's the alternative to that? What is one of the ways to heal, cure spiritual deficit? And that is to learn to trust, believe, and rely upon spiritual abundance. Not easy. Faced with the reality of being cheated or lied to, or not being effective, or living under authoritarian rule, which all governments can become authoritarian to some degree, it's easy to say spirit doesn't work on this planet. Pathwork teaches it does. Not only that, Pathwork teaches that this is a really phenomenal opportunity to see spiritual concepts in action, meaning they're in action, and the invitation is for you to see it. So spiritual abundance is faith in a concept, and that needs to be built, which means when you see evidence that doesn't exist, you're going to have to decide to overlook it or disprove it or address it, whatever, and keep going. So if you have faith and somebody comes up with a really great argument about why there is no God, and Google it, there are great arguments that you don't have an answer to, that doesn't make it true. But if it rattles your faith was looking for a place to be rattled. You were willing to release your faith. You weren't willing to do the work of saying, I'm going to hold on longer. I'm going to hold on. I'm going to try new ways. I'm going to see if this is misinformation or whether it's short-term versus long-term information. So crime doesn't pay, doesn't look like it's true in the long term, but it represents a spiritual truth that real crime, violation of spiritual law, there's a payback coming. It doesn't work. Again, we translate that into, but it's not in the news. I didn't see them arrested. And that's a childish demand for seeing the other kid punished for taking your toy. So risking to have faith. concepts often sound paradoxical. The guide says this all the time. Paradoxical is the word he uses because paradox means against the word. In other words, it's apparently against the word. Paradox doesn't mean it's not true. It just means it contradicts something else. Contradict, paradox, etc. So society has a collusion to being human. Societies form around human qualities and human desires and human goals. And these aren't spiritual goals all the time. So society colludes to advance its own goals, and it will preach against, teach against, forbid things that threaten its agenda. I'm thinking specifically of almost universal prohibitions against sex of all kinds, which the guide explains in the lecture on the spiritual significance of spirituality, another lecture 207. The guide explains this desire to control sexuality as a desire to control the sex drive because it's a strong life force current. The real desire is to control the life force, which may be expressed in this way. If you bottle the life force, it dams up and there's more life force wanting to come out. And if you can harness that force, then you can use it. A little bit like stopping a river so that you can use it for hydroelectric power instead of letting it do its own thing. Universally, cultures that try to restrict that are also trying to do other agendas. It's not the only thing on their list. So concepts often sound paradoxical, as in this won't work in the real world. The analogy I use for this is that when you look at something from the outside, it's easy to say it won't work. You haven't tried it. You don't understand it. You haven't looked at its strengths and weaknesses, so you only see the weaknesses, for instance. Just like when you think something will work, you're only seeing its strengths and you're underestimating any weaknesses. Instead of seeing a realistic view of something and saying, there's a lot of strengths here and there's some weaknesses, I'll have to shore up the weaknesses. Think of this in terms of human relationships. A relationship works fairly well when strengths are strengthened. I'm obviously having a trouble with words today. When strengths are supported and allowed to flourish, and weaknesses are compensated for by the other party. That mixture, that balance may be invisible to the outside world, but it's integral to the ability for each partner to exercise themselves as fully as they can in the real world. I, for instance, am a person who would need a strong clerical assistance crew to do certain things. I can do it, but it saps my energy for other things. With a strong admin, I can do more. With a weak administration, I'm limited to what I can get done by myself. So it won't work in the real world is the antithesis of saying, I see that piece of clothing in the window and I think it would be great and I yearn for it and I desire it before you've ever tried it on. Besides trying it on, you need to wear it in the appropriate environment. If it's an everyday item, you need to do various things in it before you truly know if it fits, if it meets your comfort standards, if it actually looks as good as it on you as it does in the window, or if there are things that you didn't notice that you don't like. I am a person that can work with something for a week or two and then decide it's doesn't work for me because I've noticed that it doesn't have a pocket or it doesn't have some feature that I need and I can't live without, even in a modest piece of clothing. So if you want a concept, if you want to try out a concept, you're going to need to walk in its shoes. You're going to have to need to work with it, try it on, fill it out, and then you may need to go back and get some feedback about your interpretation. Are you trying the concept out fully, or are you skewing it one way so that it doesn't have its full strength, if I can use those terms? So feedback on whether you got it right is important. And then going back and trying again. So to say I tried it once and it didn't work allows whatever misinterpretation happened at that time or blockage that stopped you from completing the process to win. Versus saying, I really believe this is important and I'm going to try, but frankly, I'm not going to quit trying. I'll just find different ways to do it. That's kind of what spiritual development is like. It's most people who are reading Patrick lectures have read many other things, and they are looking for something that resonates with them. I'm a big fan of upholding or supporting people who only need one lecture, who say, this is the one I needed, thank you, and they move on with their own studies. Some people stay forever, like me, and some people come back and forth or stay for a while and leave. Leave meaning they got what they needed. And some people like a dose of it periodically and visit, meaning they pick up a lecture now and then. You're the one that decides what feedback you're going to let in versus what feedback you're simply not going to hear. The last part of this lecture focuses on what I condensed as world peace requires world faith, and we're not there yet. And there's been a lot of discussion in the online meeting about the failure of the world. And this is due to the authorities who are running our nations, countries, cities, etc., living in deficit, not being fully honest, having agendas that don't that aren't long-term, but they're more short-term. And either we elect them or we support them. And the question is, how can you either shift your support to people who will live in spiritual truth, or what can you do to make spiritual truth a reality in your community and then move forward? There's a concept in another lecture that I'm working on for August, Patrick Lecture 61. It's a Q&A session all over the map, where the guide talks about a very interesting concept, and that is that there are leaders of mankind who are not known outside their immediate vicinity. If you don't know somebody like that, that's a form of poverty. You haven't met someone who's honest, who's true, who has faith. But most of us who have lived more than 20 years, we've met somebody like that. Not that they're perfect. It's not perfect leaders of mankind. It's leaders of mankind. You have the opportunity to become one of those leaders simply by living your life according to beliefs that you find to be true and improving when you find that they are not true or where you're not living up to them. When we become leaders of mankind, when there are enough of us, mankind changes. There's a place in one of the Q&As where the guide says, if 10% of humanity reached any level of enlightenment, the world would be a vastly different place. 10% seems like a small number, but if you tested it out, which you can't, I'm presuming that the guide speaks the truth. When 10% of people believe and act in a certain way, things change. It may be slow, but they change. There was another figure I heard that when 30%, oh, not 30, I beg your pardon, when 3% of a population protests, the government's in trouble. That seems like such a low number. But 100,000 people in a gathering seems large, except it's not even 1%, perhaps, of a country's population. And so I thought, yes, that's probably true. When 3% are so determined to change things that they show up, that they take action, that they express themselves publicly rather than privately, that means that the underlying belief system of far more people are likely to be in agreement, and it bodes for change. So, risking to have faith to see how it works, testing it out, and sticking with it because you believe in it, even if nobody else seems to, which is often a story in stories you read about human beings who have spent a long time fighting for their beliefs. We read the stories when they win. When they don't, we're not as interested. So to some extent, we're looking for hope. It's out there. It's a matter of whether you choose to believe these so-called failures who simply published their books before the moment happened, or whether you want rewards and success to nominate you as a success. But we are all successes eventually. So thanks for listening. Patrick Lecture 250.